Hey guys, it is Jeremy again in Coffee, and today I have a season review for you guys, and today I'm going to be reviewing the second season of The Rifleman.
Everyone will pronounce it. A couple days ago I reviewed the first season, and there's a lot of things in that season that I kind of forgot to talk about, even though it was a 30-minute review. But I have not watched my review of the first season. I will leave that link down in the doobly-doo if you want to go and check it out. The world, and I just love it. I cannot get over these characters, and I'm just really enjoying it. And this is a classic series, and the DVDs in 2 parts are running, but I went on to the Rifleman.net and I discovered that you can actually buy at least seasons 2 through 5 as the whole season, so I'm going to be hopefully investing my money and getting and maybe give these away to friends or something, because I really don't like the 2 half DVDs, because that's kind of ridiculous a little, but I got to watch it, and it's remastered, and it's fine. So, one of the things mentioned when I reviewed the first season was this is not a show that is like a lot of TV shows you see now. This is very similar with a lot of other, such as the Dick Van Dyke and Andy Griffith and Bewitched, and a lot of other classic television. Is each season doesn't follow a overall plot line. Every episode, for the most part, tells its own story, unless it is a 2-parter. Much the same with this. Every episode pretty much tells its own story. Every episode, it's kind of resolved in only 25 minutes. It's a long time to be able to do that, but they still do it fairly well, and it still remains to be a great season. One of the more amazing aspects of the show is the father-son relationship between Mark and his father Lucas. Is something I didn't realize how much I loved it until you see their chemistry. Their chemistry, like Chuck Connors and Johnny Crawford, their chemistry together is unmatched, and I love the conversations that they have, and I love there's so many like life lessons, and there's so many bits of wisdom that is entwined throughout the show. It is just amazing, being able to having Lucas having to raise a semi-small boy who's 10 years old on his own is not really the easiest thing in the world. I mean, I don't have kids, and I'm probably never going to have kids because it's just not in the cards for me. So I can't really imagine how difficult it would be to raise a young boy or a young girl. And I think what's really interesting about watching this show is, this show is set at the last 20 years of the 19th century. Things were hard back then, and it's even harder now. There's a lot that, the laws of this world are very strict when it comes to education. And there's a lot of things that are forced on the parents, which I think is kind of ridiculous. But it's really interesting, doing research and finding out that you actually, originally you actually had to pay for your child to go to school. You had to pay for their education, and a lot of public schools are free. But that's not always that way all the time. Even though the initial going to school is free, but parents still have to pay for new school clothes, shoes, other necessities that happen throughout the course of every year, which is just ridiculous. I work in retail, so every time school supply and the new school comes out, basically the parents are given this giant, humongous, to outer space list of things that they have to get every year, and they have to supply to the classrooms, such as Germex and Kleenex and things like that. And if you don't supply those things for the entire class, your child doesn't get to use those things, which is complete BS if you want my opinion. But
Anyway, I'm getting off track here. It kind of just one of those things that I mentioned because, there's a lot of mentioning, about, Mark going off to school daily, and there's a couple of episodes that have to do with school throughout the show. So it's really kind of interesting to kind of think of where, like, schooling things were, especially for small towns. And I've lived in a small town my whole life, and I love it. But there are so many layers to this show. I could be here for hours talking about it with you guys. This season doesn't have as many. Season 1 obviously had 40. We talked about that the other day. This season has 36, so it's still a long season. It's the second longest season of the show. And so the season opens up with wrong DVD, with the episode The Pacey, and I'm not exactly sure what that one's about, because I don't really pay attention to the titles, but there is an episode in this season where Mark believes he has overheard the surveyors planning on robbing the bank, but he's not really sure what he heard because he went over to bring them their morning meal, because he just does that every morning for them, and he was asleep waiting for them to come back. And that was one of my favorite episodes, to see kind of, Mark and Lucas not really at odds, but Lucas wants to believe his claim. It's just a little bit hard to believe without facts to back them up. And so Mark ends up running away from home because his father doesn't believe him, and then then Lucas is on his own path to really think about, could he be telling the truth? And then we find out that he actually was. And the ending of that episode is just too precious. If I can find the clip on YouTube of the ending of that scene, I'll try to link that down below. If there's no link, that means I couldn't find one. But I love it. This show, what's really, really fun about this show is it pulls at your heartstrings in times where you're not really expecting it to. And it's also it's an amazing Western series that's got a lot of gunfights and a lot of sometimes murder and thievery, and just there's just something to enjoy. And I said this in my review of the first season, that there's a lot of unpredictability in this show. I mean, typically when I start a new episode, I never know what's going to happen next. I could, maybe guess. Once you episodes of the show, you kind of understand everything's going to pretty much work out for the best, but the music has a huge factor of the show, and the way they play certain music during certain scenes makes it for a very entertaining watch, because sometimes you're literally sitting on the edge of your seat the entire time. And that's really great, especially for a classic series like this that a lot of maybe younger people, millennials, this generation really wouldn't watch. I'm the exception to that rule. I absolutely love it, and I'm so freaking happy that I discovered it. Because I'm like, what was I doing before this show? Like, oh yeah, that's right, watching the Dick Van Dyke Show. Gotcha. And let's see. The spoiler is by far, I think, the best episode in this entire season. The spoiler follows a young elderly, semi-elderly couple that have recently moved to North Fork, and they are establishing, their lives, and except for what the town doesn't know is that they are the parents of a very famous serial killer, thievery, very bad guy. And so Mark ends up going over, and the guy, and sorry, I don't remember his name, basically threatens him. And so he promises not to tell anyone, not even his pa. And so I mean, if that were to happen to me, I would have told my father immediately. But Mark, promised he wouldn't say anyone. And so he ends up having a nightmare that night. And so, and so Lucas ends up going in, and tries to calm him down. And the scene is way too sweet. Like, not in a bad way, in a really good way, when it kind of melts your heart into a puddle. That's also a really fantastic episode. And I love the dimensioning of, there's a lot of stories in the general merchandise store, or the general store, which is where a lot of people get their daily supplies. They get, things like blankets, food items. Basically, it's basically our version of a grocery store that's just a grocery store. Like, they have all kinds of stuff in that store, from, food to candy. Basically, it's just general merchandise. That's the only thing I can think of. It's a fairly small store. And I love the storylines that come from Hattie Denon, and she's also played by the same actress who played in the Andy Griffith Show, who played, what's her name? I don't think I remember her name on the Andy Griffith Show. She was one of Aunt B's friends. Whatever. But so there's a lot of really great moments with that and with those characters. The Deserter is a really great episode. By far one of the best episodes of the season, and it's also Johnny Crawford's favorite episode of the
entire show. If you wanted to know that is his favorite episode. And the episode is, Mark is feeling very down on himself in that episode, and he misses his mother. He misses the mother that he never really, truly got to really know. And this was one of those episodes that was a little bit hard for me to watch, because I lost my mother when I was 12 years old. And so, I still have very strong feelings, emotions for my mother, but I didn't really get to know who my mother really was, like what kind of a person she, was she. I knew what she stood for in some things, but there was a lot of things I didn't know. There was a lot of parts of my mother that was kind of kept from me because I wasn't really old enough to really understand and comprehend certain things at that time in my life. So Mark is kind of going through a very similar thing that I went through. His mother's been gone for I'd say probably close to 7 years by the time this episode takes place. And so and so he ends up drinking some contaminated water and comes down with I think it's called typhoid fever. It's a really bad fever that you get really cold and you're unconscious and you hallucinate. It's really, really bad. So he drinks some really bad water that his father told him not to drink because it's probably not good. And well, he was, he kind of didn't want to listen to his father, so he ended up drinking anyway, and he comes down with the fever. And so he ends up, it's speculated that he's actually in heaven talking to this woman, which actually is his mother. And so he has to make the decision whether to stay in heaven with her or go back to his father. And his father is basically going through a really hard time because he lost his wife and he's almost about to lose his son too. And I think if that actually would have happened, that would have just destroyed him. Obviously, we know that's not going to happen, but you still get scared. The writing in the show is one of the most brilliant things in the world of the show. So sorry I'm not really good at this reviewing thing, but literally every episode is tells its own story. I mean, if this was a straightforward show where it tells a consistent plot line, it really there's I mean, it really just has episodes. So I'm really only going through and telling you some of my favorites and what they're about. And there's not a lot of bonus features with this show, which I think is one of the most sad parts. I would have loved to have seen some behind the scenes features. They might, but to hear this just might have been one of those shows that they might not have actually done that. I mean, this is a show that, you know, 50s into 60s program that they probably just didn't do that at the time. This show really has three main characters: Lucas, Mark, and Micah. And Micah is the town's marshal. I've talked about that before. And you know, Micah is a recovering alcoholic who's also a sort of a cripple, because one of his, I think it's his right hand that he can't really use that well. I mean, he can still use it. It's not near what it was. And so almost any storyline that involves Micah, you know, you're in an interesting storyline there. I recently just finished the 3rd season, so my review of season 3 will be up on Tuesday morning, probably around, I'm guessing, noon-ish, probably. So I can't really talk about that season yet, because I think it's the best one so far. There are Sins of the Father was a really excellent episode. I mean, I could sit here and name off all the episodes, tell you that what they're all about, and I'm going to sound like a broken record. But basically, the show just, it's not bad. It's, to me, and one of the things that I love about the show is this was good television. This was when television was actually good. You know, there were, you know, back in the 50s and 60s, there was no swearing on television. There was no swearing, there was no drugs, there was no sex, there wasn't any glorified violence or anything like that. And I think that's why I tend to like these types of shows best, because it kind of reminds me of when things were actually good. I'm not saying that I don't love shows if they have a swear word every now and again or a sex scene, but it's really nice being able to find programs on TV that are actually clean. Shows that, you know, programs that you know, that kids can watch and you don't have to be afraid of them picking up bad swear words, or, you know, or it influencing them, you know, too bad. It's a little bit disappointing that we don't have more great quality TV shows like this. It'd be kind of interesting if we could have some more old shows with old values being made today. Obviously, I can guarantee it that'll never happen. So I just have to enjoy the shows that we did have. I mean, this is now the 3rd classic show, old show, that I'm now a pretty big fan of. This is definitely my #1 favorite of the 3. So sorry if this wasn't really much of a review. It's more of me of a rambling kind of sort of review and me just talking about certain episodes. But yeah, I'll try to make that better with the 3rd season. I'll try to make a lot of more extensive notes as I rewatch certain episodes. But until Tuesday, I will see you guys next time. Let me know what you thought of this video. It's not nearly as long. I controlled myself a little bit. But let me know what you thought of this season if you have watched it. Just let me know. Just let me know. I wasn't really planning on filming a video today, but I kind of was in the mood to. So yeah, I will see you guys in just a few days. And until next time, have a good one.